Last year, more than 900 million animals were slaughtered for meat in the UK. That's according to official DEFRA figures. But there aren't any official figures for the number of animals which die before reaching slaughter, from disease, accident or neglect. The vegan campaign group Animal Aid has come up with an estimate of the numbers it thinks die this way. It's a figure which it puts at 43 million animals a year. In a moment, we'll hear from Animal Aid. But first, I spoke to Catherine McLaughlin, Animal Health and Welfare Advisor at the National Farmers Union. I asked her what she made of Animal Aid's report.
I think, to be honest, it's probably not very helpful to anyone. I think it's a case of Animal Aid using fairly tragic accidents and circumstances to further their own agenda, to be honest.
What about the figures themselves? This is a headline figure, isn't it? 40 million animals die before they get to slaughter.
I'm not going to comment. I'm not prepared to comment on Animal Aid's estimated figures, to be honest. I mean, it's their estimations. If they want to justify them, maybe that's what's in the report. I don't know. But I do know that the industry has recognised best practice animal health statistics, which farmers are encouraged to work to. And I think, to be honest, when you just look at hard statistics and figures, you risk ignoring the subtleties of, kind of working out whether it's a planned cull or an unplanned cull. And sometimes understanding the information behind the statistics, it's a really important thing. So I'm not sure that, headline figures are very useful.
Regardless of whether you're a vegetarian or a meat eater, and Animal Aid is a vegan organisation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Shouldn't the industry be doing more anyway to address the issue highlighted here? Wasted animals' lives, whether it be by accident or through disease, that's not a good thing for anyone, is it?
Farmers do take their responsibilities for the welfare of their animals very seriously. And, this responsibility can sometimes mean difficult decisions and actions need to be taken to protect and preserve quality of life and the quality of death of those animals. We've got to remember that animals will inevitably die on farm through accidents or disease. And it's not in the farmer's interest to have high on-farm mortality, as it clearly impacts on a farm's profitability.
It's also an animal welfare issue, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And death is not always the worst outcome for an animal. And sometimes it is better to kill an animal.
Some would argue with you on that, surely.
Well, sometimes it's better to kill an animal in a calm, controlled and respectful manner than to attempt to preserve life at any cost.
What about keeping figures for these sorts of deaths pre-slaughter? Why aren't figures kept for that?
There are various places which do collect records. Many farmers are members of, say, things like the Red Tractor Farm Assurance. As part of those commitments to the Red Tractor Farm Assurance, they have farm health planning activities that they have to undertake, and those will actually record statistics and animal health facts and figures on the farm.
Well, would it be a good idea for the NFU to ask for figures of accidental death, disease, mortality rates on farms, and to keep those figures so you do have some idea of how big this problem is?
Again, it comes back to the fact that if we're talking about protecting animal health and welfare, which we are, actually the UK has a very good record in terms of its animal health. I would rather concentrate the NFU's efforts on that than actually just collecting data.
Catherine McLaughlin from the NFU. Andrew Tyler is Director of Animal Aid. He told me how they'd arrived at those figures.
There are no good figures on deaths in the sheds, for instance, but the trade press periodically publishes pre-slaughter mortality figures for different species, and that's what we based our calculation on. So we looked at industry figures of the percentage of animals who die before they can be slaughtered and did that as a proportion of the DEFRA slaughter figures, and we come up with a figure.
And then you also added in events.
Yeah, events.
Such as flooding on fire.
Exactly. I mean, let me give you an example. One of the cases we draw attention to are 700,000 chickens who drowned on a floodplain in sheds.
That's hugely unusual, though, isn't it? It's one case.
But what are they doing? They're rebuilding. They've almost rebuilt on the same floodplain site.
The NFU has said that this is nothing to do with slaughter figures, nothing to do with mortality rates generally.
Exactly, they're not counted
within their rights to rebuild.
Exactly, and that's my complaint. So there's no possible way when they get a flood warning of evacuating 700,000 chickens. There is also a case we highlight of 2,000 pigs who perished in a fire. 6 months later, 670... Let me just finish this point, please. 670 pigs died at the same farm in another fire. Now, this is indicative of the kind of attitude that is prevalent. There is no evacuation mandatory scheme for intensively packed sheds in the event of flood or fire. It is a messy, chaotic, pitiless business, which is why we say there is no neat mechanism for curing this pre-slaughter death or the suffering that is implicit in the slaughter process. And that's why we say unashamedly, go vegan.
Well, the point is, isn't it, that you are not happy with any deaths of any animals at all?
If a death is... my wife and I have had a number of rescued animals. We've got 5 rescued dogs at present. They die when they get old or if they get sick. We accept that. What we can't accept is industrial scale exploitation. Let's face it, they've turned animals into commodities, and these pre-slaughter fatalities are a factor.
What would you like to see done then to reduce the number of pre-slaughter deaths?
We want to minimise suffering. So we want answered the question, why is there no credible mandatory evacuation scheme in the case of fire? The industry and the regulatory bodies are saying essentially that's the status quo and that's the way it's going to remain. It is outrageous.
Andrew Tyler from Animal Aid.